I regret some of the, being involved with something I had no idea was into so much evil.
Yeah, so it delves a little bit into the sort of conspiracy aspect for me. But could you answer that question? What do you believe in? Would you describe yourself as a Scientologist?
My history or my current
right now.
stand?
Current.
Like right now. Okay, right now, I would consider myself as a independent Scientologist with certain conditions. I am not that pro Hubbard. I'm aware that L. Ron Hubbard is a very controversial person. There are a lot of things that he did and said that I don't agree with, particularly his criminal undercurrent. He tolerated a lot of criminal undercurrent in the Sea Org in order to get at his enemies, or to the most charitable thing is to say to survive in this world. However, a lot of people got hurt in the process. So I am not an apologist for L. Ron Hubbard at all. However, I do have respect for the man and appreciation for certain things that he really seemed to work hard at and got right. So I do practice the auditing technology. And I would say about 2/3 of his administration, advice, and study technology and all of that, all the things that kind of surround the auditing are okay. And about 1/3 of it is either downright evil or just stupid. I've had a lot of time to think about things, having left the organization around 2012. In the 12 years, I've arrived at a lot of conclusions. I've read everything I could possibly get my hands on, and that has led me to conclude that there's a lot wrong with Scientology. I kind of can find agreement with both sides of the fence. There's a very polarized viewpoint outside the church. Most people outside the church don't support the church. They know that there's corruption. They know that things have been taken away from what L. Ron Hubbard envisioned. So we're all in common opposition to the church, but we have varying viewpoints as to how much we trust, what L. Ron Hubbard actually wrote, said, and left behind.
Well, it's one of the reasons I wanted to talk to you, really, because I don't really get the opportunity to speak to people who are, I guess, practicing elements of Scientology and, are not on the kind of anti-Scientology space, but not pro it, like somewhere in the middle. People might be a bit confused watching this interview, but what is the difference between independent Scientology and the Church of Scientology?
Well, I would say the big difference is the sense of freedom and the awareness that there's a big difference, but you have to kind of experience it. So when you're in the church, you're kind of in a box, unless you're surreptitiously on the internet, which I was much of the time, for various reasons. I was on the Director of Special Affairs post, so for some things I needed information or to interact with the outside world a lot more than the typical Scientologist, which was a good thing because it sort of kept me aware of the controversy and the criticisms of Scientology. And it helped me to finally make my decision to come out. But most people have either been kicked out or have gotten to the point where it was too much for them to stay in the church. So they're aware that the abuses are, I think, come from two sources. One is bad policy, which I've alluded to earlier. And the other is that humans are being human beings in organizations, especially around authority. And this is the essence of Scientology as a cult. Authority is leveraged far greater inside a cult, inside Scientology, than it would be in the day-to-day world, unless you're in politics or government, or you're in situations where you have lots of contact with the police. You don't see that kind of authority unless you're in the organization. And of course, the SEAL organization, they dress up in Navy uniforms. They use the hats and the stripes and the rank. An outsider would laugh and say that was a game, but an insider takes that seriously, because there is real power there. And so outside of the church, it's much more relaxed. So even if you still believe and worship L. Ron Hubbard, there's going to be a big difference in the way you treat people, and even in the way you do auditing. So you can imagine, if I'm that far removed from agreement with L. Ron Hubbard, that my auditing style is much different. It's much more free. I'm only interested in the aspects that are going to help a person, not interested in, security checking somebody who doesn't need it or doesn't want it. Like I've heard you mention about kids getting security checks. I agree, that kind of thing is abusive, unless the kid wants it. There are some kids that are kind of bright and kind of get Scientology and gravitate toward it. I've seen a lot of different things, because I worked with kids a lot, and I had a daughter myself in the church, and she came out with me. We both, I talked to her and I told her what was happening, and she just came with her dad. So I was lucky in that sense. I don't have what a lot of people have in the field as well. I forgot to mention is they have relatives still in the church, maybe. And certainly I had lots of friends, but I didn't have any close relatives. I lost a family in Costa Rica, in the sense that I had a wife that I loved, and I had helped her raise 2 boys that were not mine, but from a previous marriage. And that was very hard for me. So there's a lot of scars of disconnection in the field, but for most of us, that just meant a deeper appreciation of freedom outside the church, a deeper appreciation of family, and those that clung to Hubbard's technology in any way, whether it be the auditing or some of the other things. I think they couldn't help but do it differently, not being under the pressure of the authoritarian church. And so I would say the biggest difference, the simplest answer to your question, is the authoritarian structure in the church that unfortunately we have to assign to L. Ron Hubbard, because he structured it that way, is extreme. I don't think I'm exaggerating if I would compare it to something like East Germany in some sectors, especially in the SEAL organization, because it's a system which depends on everyone, and this can be good in some ways. Sometimes you miss it outside the church. The idea that you can write reports, get things straightened out. If it's done right, it actually works. If it's done wrong, it's like a tattletale totalitarian system where every time you sneeze, you go into go in on the meter and get checked over what your out ethics is, or what your out ethics, meaning you're not being ethical like the church expects you to be. Knowledge reports came around in 1982. Hubbard was already in hiding, and it was the last 4 years of his life. We don't even know how much he thought, that should be done the way it was written. However, there was already a report system in place, and you were expected to report things. So knowledge reports officially kind of made that all official, and made it like a penalty. If you didn't report, you were just as bad as the person you didn't report on, and you were liable to the same penalties. So knowledge reports is what I'm talking about when I say East Germany, because that's the way East Germany operated, a totalitarian state. And I'm not saying, all of Scientology felt like that, because I was lucky to be on the lower levels in the churches. But as a director of special affairs, I got to observe, on the fringes, a lot of the things that, the people that come out of the church on the Leah Remini show and things like that people have heard. Yeah, they're not exaggerating. There was some abuse there. I didn't see quite the abuse these guys described, but I saw the atmosphere. I can easily imagine these things happening in that atmosphere.
Yes, no, and you're obviously referring to the Office of Special Affairs when you say director, and I do definitely want to get into talking to you a little bit about that in a bit. But since I have you here, I've always wanted to ask, and I've tried to ask many a Scientologist what they believe in, and on the streets and in various situations, and they can never give me an answer. They just say, read a book, or, they direct me to a video or whatever, whatever it is. Now, what if I ask you the question, what do you believe in on a sort of faith level? And I want to preface and say, I believe everyone can believe whatever they like. Faith is faith. It's not me to decide what's right or wrong. But could you answer that question? What do you believe in?
Absolutely. I think it's a great question. And in fact, in the last few years, I have tried to take Scientology into a non religious, or you could say secularized version in the auditing. And I have groped with that question. What does anyone need to believe anything to benefit from the auditing? The answer is actually no. It could be argued that there's one minimum belief to call yourself a Scientologist. And that would be basically that you are an eternal spiritual being. And that belief overlaps with a lot of other religions as well. Um, I was raised in not fundamentalist, but Christianity. And my dad tended to practice a more fundamentalist version, very strict upbringing. If you really think about it, and the Protestant Christianity I was raised with, you believe in eternity, but kind of like a half an eternity. It's like most Christians believe that they started when they were born and that they're going to spend eternity somewhere, the good place or the bad place, and they better get it right so that they, you know. So I was raised in that environment, and the idea of past lives or having lived since the beginning of eternity wasn't really what was something I had actually already begun to entertain before I came upon Scientology. See, I was already 29 years old. A lot of people come upon Scientology in their early 20s. It's usually some college level contact. For me, I was 29 years old. So back to your question, uh, and a lot of Scientologists will do just what you're talking about. They'll say, go read this book or watch this video. And it's kind of frustrating because you're not getting any answers. Um, there's a lot of beliefs in Scientology, and a lot of them center around the faith and trust in L. Ron Hubbard because he was an impressive author, advisor, and the way he structured the auditing. Of course, a lot of people get benefit out of that. And so because of that, they then begin to assume, and I put myself in this category while I was in the church, you begin to assume, well, if this guy was this good and knew this much about auditing and about myself, what's inside me and how I get to it, that's pretty amazing. So you start accepting some of the um, cosmology and, the famous OT3 cosmology, which is very science fiction. People can see it if they haven't already on YouTube on there was a show, South Park. So anyway, you'll get the OT3 story in cartoon version, and it's, it, one of the things is a lot of people might assume that all Scientologists believe that. Actually, you're not supposed to even know about it until you get there. And so, yes, anyone who's done OT3 and above and stayed in the church almost certainly believes something of that tale or takes it seriously in some way. And most of the people about you, um, that's a really good question because I am very much in disagreement with the way Hubbard issued that level and the way he tells people they need to audit that level. But I don't dismiss the idea that somewhere in our spiritual past there was a huge, very destructive or very catastrophic event, or actually many, okay? And so he claims that this event happened 75 million years ago on planet Earth in the volcano system. And I think it's far-fetched, but I can't say that I reject it entirely. I have not done that level yet, and I don't plan to. You're supposed to rush and get to that level because you're at risk. You know, he has said that there's a danger if somebody goes clear on Dianetics, which I did, and then you don't go up to OT3. So I found that's not really true. So I remain quite skeptical about the story, but as as there are such events on any being's history, I plan to look into it someday. Let's just say that.
Okay, fair enough. And it's no crazier of a story, I guess, than any other religious story. We can't say yes or no, can we? As for the the upper levels, the unreleased OT levels, are they real? Do you know?
Um, that is another thing that I have done a lot of work and research on. I've talked to a lot of people, the old timers. I have determined, in my mind anyway, that there's very few that disagree with me, that all of the original OT levels are intact and are on the internet, and the ones that are on the websites are match the original OT levels. And those went from 1 through 7, and then some. There's a lot of controversy about OT8, which for a long time was the highest level. In Scientology, the number 8 has significance because we have 8 dynamics, which are all the spheres of life, all the way from personality to divinity, in the 8th level. So everything was always structured from 1 to 8 or 0 to 8. One of the persons who came out who had worked with L. Ron Hubbard was named Captain Bill Robertson.
Gentlemen, I think that we have to define a definition here. David, if I may, excuse me, this is a free. I think we're guaranteed the right to express our opinions by the creed of the church. I would like also to establish here, what is the basic definition? What is Scientology? Is it a building? Is it a comm basket? No. Is it a piece of paper that says you are an SP? No. It is a philosophic machine, the org board and so on, but it can only be operated by Thetans, not in Thetans. And its power, its strength is the technology. Scientology is its theta and its technology. We do not alter that technology. I curse anyone who alters the technology and the policy. I am Ron's deputy, and I'm here to see that that tech stays in just as David Mayo is, and just as anyone who is trying to do it here.
And he developed what he called Excalibur, which was an expansion of Hubbard's OT levels in the church. And through some of the older material back in 1952, which became confidential after a while, especially when they figured out that it kind of matched Hubbard's new OT level ideas. And this all works with personalities. We call them valences, but I guess the word, outside of Scientology would be personalities that you've had in the past, as well as personalities that have been given to you somehow, or that, and this gets into the realm which I've always stayed out of, thankfully, because I had a Christian upbringing. The whole idea of, I don't want to say demonology because that's totally wrong, but the idea of demons, what they are they mental figments, or are they actual beings that are outside of us? So those are the upper levels. You're not supposed to talk about them in Scientology. I've looked into them. I haven't, read word for word every one of them, but I I have come to determine that that is not something that creates any great spiritual enlightenment or movement. For some people, they have had a lot of benefits from it. And so I don't really like to take away from that or argue against it, but the so-called new OT levels that came about in the 1980s are, in my opinion, very different and very uh, a lot less interesting than the original ones. A lot of people have come up with new OT levels. Like I told you, Captain Bill Robertson came up with OT levels all the way to 48. And in my own recompiling of the technology outside the church, I just went back and stopped at 8. 8 is supposed to be kind of the communion with the divinity, where you have handled all the things about yourself and the things that you're connected with, all your dynamics. And it's like the final route, and it should be sort of a communion or a prayer or something like of that nature. I am not wild-eyed or, wanting to know what are those secret old OT levels. Are they in L. Ron Hubbard's folder somewhere? Anything like that. There's a lot of people still, we call it electrified over all that possibility and all that material, and whether you could make a Superman or how superhuman you could get. I have concluded that Scientology auditing helps somebody to become free from their limitations, and that much is true. And when you become free from your limitations and you become a little more spiritually aware, you start developing some ability. There are various abilities like telepathy and things like that. I'm not claiming to have those abilities, but I will say that my intuition and that my communion or communication with the invisible is a lot greater than it was when I started.
What's the invisible?
Yeah, the spiritual, or that which people try to describe as the angels and demons of the universe, that kind of a thing. I'm not claiming to have that, but I am aware to some degree, and I do have those moments of being in tune with the universe, which anyone in or out of Scientology can have, right? There's nothing particularly special about Scientology except for the ability to go back into your past and find things. Another criticism I noticed you made, which I think is very valid and especially applies to children, is when you push people back into the past too quickly, they feel obligated to invent something. And that's a common complaint of people who've come out of Scientology. So a lot of what I do in my practice and in restructuring what we call the bridge or the lineup of auditing is to put it back on a common sense basis and not push so fast and let people discover at their own speed. Without doing that, you're going to have what you have in the church, a lot of people that subscribe to delusion, that take a lot of what Hubbard said on faith rather than on what they discover for themselves. And we'll start inventing things. And then when you become inventive in yourself, when you start lying to yourself, you just start going down the chute because you're no longer connected with reality. So I have a very different viewpoint, and I think a lot of people share that viewpoint, that have had experience with the church, but they haven't been able to really put it into words. And it's been a challenge for me to put into words. It's really been a challenge to swim upstream because a lot of people want to know what are the ultimate OT levels? How do I get to be Superman or super powerful or whatever? And to me, power is being able to hold your position in the face of a lot of force or a lot of evil and to do the right thing in spite of all that. And that's kind of a radical thought. Definitely people who have done Scientology can see what I'm saying, can see that the tools are there to be able to do that. But it's never really been put in those terms. That's what we're really trying to do, is we're trying to overcome evil in this universe. It's a spiritual war, and I share that much still with the Christians. I really believe that there are evil forces on the planet, and the problem is Hubbard was working with and for some of those forces and compromised his integrity. Um, it, at least the way he wanted us to see him as sort of a messiah or somebody who was a friend to mankind. He was that in some ways, but I can't take the whole package.
He was a hypnotist, was he not?
He was a hypnotist and knew a lot about hypnosis, and that makes an interesting controversy about auditing. Is auditing hypnotism? Does it work on hypnotism?
You literally asked my question for me.
Yeah, the answer is, and I've looked into it. I'm not a hypnotist myself, nor have I read really deeply into hypnotism. But what I discovered for myself and satisfied myself was that hypnotism is everywhere. I mean, we are a species, mankind is, that's easily programmed, easily advertised to, easily sold. We are in a sort of a hypnotic state most of the time and are not really aware of how much we are. And the unconscious mind is like 75 to some say as high as 90% of the mind. And we're only aware of like 10%, and we're not aware of a lot of the information coming in. So, although I think Hubbard no doubt used hypnotism in certain situations and was aware of its power, I think, having looked into it, I think that auditing is the way he advertised it, that we're trying to break the hypnosis with auditing, and that auditing is an attempt to dehypnotize the person so they become actually aware of things that were only under the surface or deeply under the surface, as in deep past trauma. I will concede to the critics of Scientology that the TRs, or the training routines where you sit there and practice communication, can be hypnotic and overwhelming for some people. And when that happens, that's a failure of the supervisor to observe that the person's not quite ready to do this level of TRs. I think that has happened, that people have gone into hypnotic trance on the TRs and not been able to surmount it and overcome it. And then they go off in a way and they criticize it. And I completely understand it. I don't think that was the intention. I think the intention is to break hypnosis, but they're in working with people, whether, across the table with an auditor or across the other chair with working in communication drills, hypnosis can play a role. And our goal is to break the hypnosis and actually become aware in present time, kind of the same goals that the Eastern religions and the Eastern masters with their students were trying to accomplish. And I think Scientology accomplishes some of those things very efficiently, but it can be abused or misused, and then hypnosis will indeed play a role. If we call it SEC checking, which stands for security checking. In other words, using the e-meter to try to find out what's wrong with me or what I might have stolen or taken or something like that. And you beat me up for hours with questions. Yeah, I'm going to go into a state of hypnosis and it's going to be traumatic. Auditing can be abused, and in which case it becomes very hypnotic in a very negative way. But my opinion, I can only say opinion because I'm not an expert on it, is that Hubbard was trying to and did succeed because, I feel that I broke a lot of my hypnosis. And I'm not subject to advertising and suggestion nearly as much as I used to be. So I've seen the difference in myself. But it's got to be used with good intention on both sides. It's the auditor and the person receiving the auditing have to both be honest and of good intention in order for that to work and to break into the hypnosis, which is a goal.
Yeah. You said you do, independent auditing. Do you use an e-meter?
Both actually, and this is relatively new because when you come out of the church, you don't think there's any such thing as auditing without a meter.
What does it do then? What's the significance of it?
Well, the meter helps to direct a person into what we call a charged area, which means electronic charge. The mind actually has a measurable electronic flow that actually flows through the body. So when you grab these two electrodes or cans and you hold them, you're actually getting a trickle charge through your body, not enough to shock you or anything, not even close. And the change in the electricity is what you're looking at with the needle that goes across the dial. It goes like this, and when it goes like this smoothly, it's a floating needle, which means everything's good. We can go on to something else. A fall means, whoops, there's something there. Let's take a look, and it may lead you into an area that you didn't realize it was there. That's where you're kind of getting into the subconscious.
Those like measurements and indicators, like how has it been like independently measured, studied? How can you say, oh, this falls, which equals this? Like, where does that come from?
That's a great question. And that's a very important thing to be aware of, that just because a meter falls does not mean really anything other than we saw some charge right at that moment. And then you have to ask the person, well, what was that? Now, if you assume anything, now if I had you on the meter and I asked you, did you steal the strawberry shortcake from the freezer? And I didn't fall. I'm pretty like 90% that you were the one, because you reacted to that precise question instantaneously. Okay. Now, if other things happened, we still might not be sure about it. Okay. So all I can say is it does instantly measure reactions. Let's put it that way. These are reactions. The reaction may be, in fact, that, when I said 90%, that other 10% is you have a lot of protests that I'm even asking you, or that I even thought you might have taken the strawberry shortcake. So therefore, the 10% could be just a protest. And you have to sort that out. And somebody who's good on the meter can begin to see whether the needle starts floating again, which means everything's okay, or whether there's more to look at. And so it's like taking you down a trail. So it's like a compass or a speedometer or all the things that you use in your car. It doesn't drive the car or tell you what's outside there. It just tells you some part of what you're looking at, and it guides you closer to something, let's say, of importance. And so metered auditing is I consider superior to non-metered auditing for one reason, and that is it's about 2 or 3 times more efficient. And in some cases, many times, because you can't get at certain areas without the meter. So when you're doing general auditing, you're just trying to probe into someone's past, if there's some trauma there, the meter helps about 2 or 3 times as fast, more efficient. So it's worth doing on a meter if you can, because it helps the auditor guide you in. It sort of steers you into an area. Okay. It's not completely infallible. And a lot of Scientologists, like, I don't know if anyone's heard of the new Ron Hubbard, who's sitting in a Tennessee prison right now. And his name was Justin Craig, and he changed his name to Lafayette Ron Hubbard and says he's a reincarnation of L. Ron Hubbard. Well, one of the reasons that he has been taken seriously by some people in the field is that he got on the meter, and when he said he was L. Ron Hubbard, everything floated beautifully. Okay, so I'll level with people. A con artist can float the needle. A psychopath or a sociopath can fool the meter, and that's how a lot of the executives. You hear about these executives with David Miscavige. They're pretty evil because they stayed with him. They're the ones that refused to leave. They didn't leave. Some of them couldn't. Let's be fair. But there are people that still go.
You couldn't leave.
People like Heber Jentz, who used to be the president of the church. He's too old to get very far down the road. He's not athletic enough to do the sprint, even if he did get over the fence. So there are people like that are kind of trapped, sadly enough. But there are other people that just chose to stay because they were into the whole authoritarian, give me the power over others thing. And they became very abusive people. And they got to where they were because they fooled the meter, pretty much. I would, in my opinion.
Is it fair to say it's more of a of a spiritual tool rather than a scientific one, because where's the, like I said, the cause and effect kind of analysis of what everything means. Where is that? Who's done it? Is there a study? Like, do you know what I mean? If it's a tool, is it spiritual or is it scientific in your view?
I would say both, because you have to accept the Scientology teaching and training of the meter as pretty much spiritual, because there's a lot of gray area things that Hubbard even changed his mind over. Like a rock slam is a wild, wild thing of the meter. And originally he said that was just somebody had been seriously invalidated. And that morphed and changed into, in the end, in the late 70s, that this means somebody has an evil intention towards that subject. Really, scientifically, you could say the brain waves are really wild in that moment, meaning the person is kind of, the thoughts are out of control. So you could say both, that either the person's in complete overwhelm and or is feeling really evil, like really gritty, like want to kill somebody kind of a thing. So let's get back to some of the things that can be scientifically proven or proven to the person in person. Okay. If I had a meter with you, and this is done often, this became as I was leaving the church in 2012, this became the standard procedure, because somebody in New York decided to take what we call the pinch test. You pinch someone's arm while they're holding the cans, and you see the needle fall. Okay. And what will happen, and this works almost 100%, I've hardly ever see it not work, is you'll ask the person to recall the moment of the pinch, and then that needle will go like this instantly. So in that sense, you can say it's scientific in the sense that, hey, there's something real to this. But when you start to put meaning into, well, what did that mean when the meter did what it did? Then that's open to interpretation. And then you're into the gray area of spirituality. So I don't have a definitive answer for it, but I could say, honestly say both, and that some of these things are uncannily accurate, and direct, and some not so direct. Sometimes I will get a nice big fall on somebody, but ask them to look and what was that, and they're unable to find it. Usually they can, because a simple fall just means something has appeared in the mind, and it's available to look at or find. And usually that's the case, but not 100%. So I don't trust the meter 100%. If someone says something that differs with the meter, I keep going and I let them talk, and we sort it out eventually. The meter starts going well, or it just helps put you on trails. So it's like a tool, but it's not everything. And it depends on the auditor or the Scientologist. Even auditors in the church, some of them are not, religiously, they know that even Hubbard had written several times, you don't know what the meter did when the meter fell. You have to ask the person. You have to find out. And so not everyone, follows the same book or the same references, you might say.
Yeah, it's often kind of criticized for being a sort of primitive lie detector. What do you make of that kind of characterization of it?
Well, it can be used in that way. And like I said, if I had you on the meter and wanted to see if you were the one that did something, I would have to formulate the question exactly. If you were pretty good at concealing things, right? Otherwise, most people respond very easily and quickly, and they say, "Yeah, it was me," you know. Um, and so in that sense, it can be good, because some people want to do a confessional. They want to get relief from that, and the meter helps saying, I get to say what's that, rather than then come up and saying, "You know what I did." Uh, People aren't like that. They're withholding what they did. They wish they hadn't done it, right? So when you get them on the meter and it reads, you get to say, "What is that?" You know, And little by little, they become willing to tell you, and then they're incredibly relieved at the end of that. I'm not sure I answered your question, though. I think I got off on a tangent.
Do you think it could be described as a lie detector?
Thank you. Okay, it actually Hubbard admitted that it was actually a part of a lie detector, and people who run lie detectors, they're because of the multiple things that the lie detector is measuring. It's a multiple instruments doing blood pressure. I don't remember, but many other things, right? Breathing, you know. Okay, because of that, their needles are almost never as sensitive. So what they'll have is kind of a stiff, heavy needle that will respond to big things and will give them a read, but then it's in the context of the other things, the breathing, the other things. So what we have is a very responsive sliver of the lie detector in a light needle that responds instantly and in sometimes very little subtle ways that the auditor can kind of check up on and follow up on. So it's not a reliable lie detector, but if you're using it that way and you're really good at the meter, but when I say good at the meter, it's not that you're just technically a master at the meter, which I am because I did their huge metering course, which almost nobody ever passed. Um, it was difficult, but I passed that. And but it's more than that. You cannot be like an inquisitor. If the person gets that you're being an inquisitor, they're going to clam up and it's going to be almost impossible. In the church, the auditors that were good were the ones that were good at making the person feel that they weren't really in as much trouble as they thought. But of course, when they got out of in the C organization, you're in trouble, you know. And that's a shame because that's not auditing and that's not therapeutic to a person when they're hoping to confess something in a session and their secrets are just going to be written up and sent to what we call HCO, Hubbard Communications Office. They're in charge of ethics. They're going to sit down and talk to you. They're going to assign some amends and penalties, right? Truly outside the church, someone with compassion could and knows how to operate a meter could help you come to a lot of conclusions that you otherwise would never get to because the meter is a good tool for doing that. So it can be an effective lie detector. It can be if it's competently used, let's say.
What do you think that the Church of Scientology Organisation would think about what you do outside of your sort of independent practice?
Well, they're very much against it. And Hubbard preempted all this a long time ago. He knew he wanted to be the only one that developing this kind of thing. He wanted his field auditors who were giving him a lot of processes and ideas. He says in Keeping Scientology Working 1965 that he developed all this himself. And that's just not true. I found this out through multiple accounts, firsthand accounts, that he depended on his network of auditors in the field. And he exerted as much authority as he could get away with. Auditors are free-thinking people. So, the ones who tended to succeed in his organizations were the ones who could, who were interested in the authoritarian structure, the pyramid. The boss tells us to do this, but also had some compassion. And those are kind of a rare breed. And I consider I was kind of that, for my first dozen years in Scientology. And I began to break out of it, thankfully, with the help of my Scientologist wife in Costa Rica at that time. She was very much against this authoritarian stuff. And she was very helpful to me in straightening out my own mind, even while I was still in the church.
I was wondering about, we've kind of started at the end here, haven't we, about where you're at now, which I think is really useful for our audience to know, just for context. But how the heck do you get involved with all this stuff in the beginning? You grew up in fundamentalist Christianity. You said you got in your 20s. What kind of drew you into the whole Scientology thing?
Yeah. So I would say that I had a kind of an authoritarian upbringing and fundamentalist Christian type upbringing, but I was also exposed to a wide variety of Christian viewpoints, very liberal, very, very free. And so I tended personally to gravitate towards those, but then I was very, under a lot of tight discipline in my upbringing. And I got into marijuana and drugs, in my late teens and even some LSD. And so I wound up at a point where I was very interested in religious things, Eastern philosophy, that kind of a thing, because of my drug experiences. But then this is all laid over a very tight, shy, authoritarian personality, as that I was trying to break out of that shell. And the only way I could find to break out of that shell actually was things like smoking marijuana. So, but then I found some various practices, a little bit of martial arts, things like that. And I found that, and I ultimately wanted to be off drugs completely because in the meantime, a baby daughter was born, and I spent a year with her before her mom wanted a divorce. So during that period, I wanted to be away from drugs and I wanted to find some answers. And so that journey to find answers took me several years. And this is all through my 20s. And in my late 20s, I wound up in Seattle in 1991, right about the Iraq War. And I was very much anti-war. I sort of gravitated towards the hippie ideals and things like that. And I found myself very angry that we were at war and we lived in a country that I had a lot of disagreements with the government and things like that and the authoritarianism. So I was anti-authoritarian, but I hadn't broken free from my own condition, in the past. So I got myself to speak against the war on the campus. And, a few people stopped to listen to what I was saying. And for me, it was a big breakthrough. I was able to speak in public for the first time ever. I just made myself do it. And the irony was that when I was done, I crossed the street, waiting for the bus on the corner, and there's the Church of Scientology is right there on the corner in Seattle. And the guy was very nice to me. He asked me what I was doing, if I might want to come in and take a personality test. I said I was here speaking against the war on the campus. And he said, "Great. We have tools for communication. You can become a better speaker." And of course, I thought, great, let's do this. I took the personality test and I was sold on taking the communication course. If I took the communication course, I'd learn how to communicate. And I was so shy and reserved and fearful of public speaking and talking. So I went home. I didn't have any money at that time. I had just been in an accident. I was recovering with some friends in Seattle. One of those friends, oddly enough, had been on Scientology staff for a short period. And so when I asked him if I could borrow money, he said, "What is it for?" And I said, "I want to do the communication course." And he says, "Who is that?" And I said, "It's the Church of Scientology." He says, "Oh." And this is a friend that would loan me money for anything, including probably for drugs, although I was no longer doing drugs. But he wouldn't loan me money for the communication course because he says that's a cult and they just slam down dictionaries and argue over the meanings of words and you don't want to go there. So I said, "Yeah, I want to do the communication course." He says, "Nope." This is hilarious because if you knew my friend, he would loan you money literally for anything, but he wouldn't do that. So I wound up coming back to Colorado from Seattle. And then I wound up moving to Texas again, Dallas area, because my daughter was moving there with her mom. And so I thought I could be with my daughter again because it wasn't practical before. They were living out in Florida. So they coming back to Texas, I had a job anytime I wanted it because I was a carpenter building houses. And I had a really good relationship with framing carpenter contractor who just let me work whenever I wanted. And I took my daughter on a trip to see my relatives back in the New England area. And I did this every 2 years with her. We stopped by a used bookstore. I found a copy of Dianetics in paperback. And I looked on the back of it and I saw this captain with a hat on a ship. It was Ron Hubbard. And I remembered what my friend had told me in Seattle. He said, there's this really old man that went out on a ship to hide from the government and research all these secrets of the mind. And I remember thinking, when I heard that, I thought, ooh, that's my kind of guy. Somebody who escapes the government and the matrix and goes out and researches the mind. I want to know about that. So you can imagine when I saw the picture on the back, that's that guy. Oh, of course, I got the book Dianetics, and I got a little book for my little daughter. I think she was about 6 years old at that time. And some books to read to her. And we just got on the road and I started reading Dianetics. And I was enthused and excited to do this when I came back. Because when I read the first chapters, I had been sort of interested in communism when I was in university. I saw the enemies as the rich capitalists. And I thought, somebody's controlling this matrix or this planet and we need to do something about it. And I thought maybe politics is a solution. Well, for the first time when I read Dianetics in 1993, I thought, you know what? The solution is we got to fix ourselves, and Hubbard is right. So whether, how right he was can be argued, but, definitely there's something to doing the inner work and fixing ourselves and then, trying to fix things politically has never worked. So I found something new. I became very enthusiastic about it. I was very cautious because I thought, this is Scientology. That's a cult, isn't it? So I read a little bit and I, approached it with caution. So the first full year, I didn't want to call myself a Scientologist. Even when I joined staff, it's like, oh no, I didn't want to admit that. And finally, when I came back from New Mexico in the summer of 1994, I had taken and this is very unusual. Usually when you sign up on staff, even if they promised you when you signed up that you get to go and you get to finish your college education, it's usually an empty promise. But I held them to it. I said, you guys told me I could go to summer school and finish this. That's the condition I signed up on staff. And I persisted long enough till they finally realized that they were going to talk me out of it. So I went to New Mexico. When I came back, I thought of leaving. This is the only time I really thought of leaving because it was such a contrast, me going back to the university, the real world, so to speak. And here I was back in the cult and I thought, this is weird. This feels weird. And yet there were a lot of things about it that I still realized I liked and that were good. And so I did the security check where they work you over and ask you if you've done anything bad while you were gone from staff, right? And I got the security check from Mr. Jim, and anyone from in the Dallas area know that Mr. Jim's Pizza is a huge thing, so he's a well-known businessman in Dallas. And he was a Christian himself, Christian Scientologist. So he gave me this security check, and it was the most wonderful thing for me because, like I said earlier, I wanted to get these things off and, admit the things that I had done wrong. And I did. And when I was done, I realized I could call myself, I was also always all my life embarrassed of calling myself a Christian. I just thought that was so embarrassing. Maybe because of the kids thing with their parents or whatever. But for the first time, when I walked out of these sessions, I felt free. I felt good. And I felt, hey, I'm the Scientologist, big deal. I'm a Christian, big deal. It's like I could call myself those things and be proud of it and not feel introverted or really like ashamed. So I thought that was a great thing. And so that's how I got started. I finally, even though I was on Scientology staff, I didn't consider myself a Scientologist until that point. And I thought, because for me, it was Dianetics. Dianetics was like closing your eyes and reliving the trauma, and you'll get all those things out and you'll become clear. And it all made sense. And it all kind of does work that way, but there's a lot more to it than what's simply written in the book.
Yeah, no, that's a really I don't common's not the word I want to use, but it speaks true to lots of stories I've heard of how people tend to get involved with it, and it's kind of like you get on the ride and then it keeps going and you're involved in it, you join staff, before you know it, you're in a full-fledged cult, right? Um so you mentioned to me when we were talking before this that at some point in this journey things took a turn and I mean, you can tell the story, but you mentioned to me about being kidnapped at one point. Could you let us know what the heck happened? How did we get here?
Yeah, that's kind of the climax of the telling. And we would be here all day if I really documented all of the abuse that in my career, even for the 16 years, and some people were in it much longer. But there's one story that I could kind of highlight, which did end up in a de facto kidnapping. In other words, they had my passport on the ship. And even though I needed to be back home to teach school, because I was a school teacher, and just that's not common for staff members, but since I had to pay child support and I didn't, they didn't want me to get in trouble. I didn't want to get in trouble, right? It's like, nor did I want to be irresponsible as a father. So I kind of maneuvered myself into a teaching career, which gave me the maximum time off, because you get to leave school at 4 if you have to. Usually a teacher's work is quite after hours, a lot of teachers, and I had to do that a lot. And then you have your summers off. So it gave me the maximum time to spend in Scientology because they always demanded that I was there. It's like they wanted me full time. And I actually had to write up a big report to Celebrity Center International about why I couldn't be full time and still not go to jail for not paying child support. So it had to be that drastic for them to give me an exception, right? So I wound up becoming a school teacher, and I loved it. I've been a school teacher a long time. I'm retired now. I'm still teaching online, so I'm semi-retired. Teaching school was how I managed to stay on staff, and afford those things. So at the time that I got, detained on the ship, I needed to be back home to start the second semester. I had gone during my Christmas break, and most teachers know that if you don't have control of your classroom after the break, you won't get it for the rest of the year. So for me, it was more than just, I can take a few days off. It was like, I need to be back there with my kids, or I'm going to have hell to pay for the rest of the year, keeping.
This is your job as well, right? Like this is your actual job.
Shoot.
Did your like the head teacher, the bosses, did they say anything about this? Like what happened?
I had to tell the lesser tale, or what we call the acceptable truth. I didn't tell the whole story that I was kidnapped on a ship in a cult. I told them, hey, the sailing, which was true, the sailing plan has changed. I can't get to my original plane, so it's going to be a couple days before I can find a plane to get back home. And this is down in the Caribbean with the Freewind ship.
Are you being told this is what you've got to say? Do you come up with the answer? Why didn't you just say they've got my passport and they won't let me leave? Like what?
Mainly because my fellow teachers, principal, whatever, because I was communicating by email, would not have understood. And I would have given them a problem they couldn't solve. What were they going to do? Go to the FBI and say, our teacher is kidnapped? I knew I was coming home. I just didn't know when. And I didn't want to burden them with, worrying about me. It's just a matter of, and it was true. It was mostly true that it was just a matter of getting the next plane home. And that's what happened. But for several days, I was unable to leave the ship. And so I have to backtrack the story here because it actually goes back a ways. And maybe this will be a a good representative story for what it's like to be on staff, especially in Office of Special Affairs in Scientology. So this sort of the earlier beginning here is sort of around the summer of 2001 when I go to Los Angeles to do my what we call the full hat, which means full training to be the director of special affairs in an organization. So a lot of people have heard bad things about OSA, and a lot of those are true. There is a dirty tricks department, and that from the dirty tricks department, any crimes that you've heard about, people being harassed and chased, that was all done either through David Miscavige directly, through his private investigators, and or through OSA, and at that time it was Mike Render.
Many of their stories are corroborated in sworn court testimony by up to a dozen other people. Are they all lying?
They sat in a room, they figured out what they were going to say, they wrote their bits, they passed them around, they made sure that they were consistent, and yes, they were paid for that.
Mike Render was actually, I had a boss who was Office of Special Affairs, Western United States, commanding officer. Very nice guy, very intelligent guy, a lot like me. I saw myself in him a lot. And a guy that I don't think is into dirty tricks. So this is an important thing to distinguish and understand about OSA and about authoritarian organizations themselves. Any group or section doing evil needs a lot of good guys to flank them, so that when people go into what is OSA do, there are some fine, upstanding men like me. I was selected to be a white hat because I had good IQ score, good scores. I had done very well in my auditing. I had a white hat, somebody who is not likely to engage in anything bad, somebody who's in Scientology to do the good thing, to save the world, and kind of thinks that's what Scientology is doing. So when you have your undercurrent over here doing OSA International and the office, the Department of Dirty Tricks, which is called, I'll think of it in a minute. It's been so long. Bureau of Investigations. Okay. So I did interact with them. I worked with them and for them at times. And at times I even went out to OSA International to study folders of church enemies that were in my area.
What did you think of that?
I thought it was interesting. First of all, I agreed that this was a valid enemy. I didn't agree with all of them. I would look at people like Jesse Prince and go, what did this guy do? Oh, he supposedly grew a marijuana plant, and a guy who had hardly anything, on him. And I would look at those packages and I would go, that's a little over the top, don't we think? And, but I had no one to talk to about that. So it's basically, I had disagreements with that whole intrusive track this guy with private investigators thing. That wasn't me. That wasn't what I wanted to do. I actually went down to Alan Walter. He was the squirrel that I was. Squirrel is the enemies of the church doing their own auditing outside the church, which I would be considered one. Alan Walter was, before he passed away, I think in 2009. And he had a center called Knowledgeism, and he had been on the ship with Ron Hubbard. And so he had a center in Dallas, and I went there and I pretended to be a teacher from the Lancaster School District, which backfired on me because she said, oh, you're going to want to meet such and such. She's in that school district too. And I thought, I'm trying to, I'm being an undercover, right? I'm trying to get into, see what they're doing. And that just wasn't me. I sat there and I thought, oh, this sucks. So I don't make a very good spy. I don't like doing this. I see what they're doing as pretty benign. They're just having a life improvement center like we do. But I was also somewhat in the spirit of, well, he was an enemy of L. Ron Hubbard, and he's a selfish man who wants just to make money. So I thought I was going after the right enemy to some extent. I had my doubts, but I sort of, I have to admit, there was something inside me that was triggered, by the authoritarian environment or giving me this power that I got to vent my anger or take out my anger on a real bad guy, just like the movies, right? So, yeah, I have to admit, I got caught up in that for a while. And it was quite a while later where I finally let go of, I shouldn't have been doing been so enthusiastic about doing all that. There's so much I could talk about. I don't want to get too far off. But Alan Walter was one of our targets, and people will recognize that who have, been in Scientology in the past. That is, you asked me, the different departments of OSA. My job was to protect my organization locally, and at times I was called on to be the eyes and ears of management. That was the other thing. And at times, because of that, I was called on to do various jobs for them, because I was a trusted, there's a big thing in David Miscavige's world about trust. He wants somebody who's cleared for, who's done all the security checking and passed everything, and he knows that they're not going to go off and, spout off to the media the secrets, secret missions that David Miscavige had everybody doing, right? So I was trusted. I will tell you a quick story because I wanted to tell this anyway. A quick story makes me feel bad, almost cry sometimes when I remember this. It was around the same time, 2001, maybe 2002, because I think it was probably the summer of 2002. And the only part of his name I remember was James. But I was called to rush to the airport in my car and pick up 2 Sea Org members on mission. And they landed in Dallas. I picked them up, and then they told me, you go to the Greyhound bus terminal in Dallas. Okay. So what I realized the mission was James had blown from the Sea Org. I didn't realize this guy had grown up in Scientology and was only like 18 years old. And they had tracked him from his travel records.
Who's they?
They meaning OSA, Office of Special Affairs, working for David Miscavige, because this is a high priority thing. If someone blows international base, that was the top security thing where David Miscavige works. You don't blow international base and get away with it. They're going to find you and they're going to try to get you back. And, that's a lot of those people that are on the Remini show, right? They successfully blew the base. Okay. So this young man, I did get to see him a little later. So we're sitting in a dark car. It's almost like a stakeout, where one of the guys goes and sees if he could find James, who's in between buses, right? And so he's, going to be milling around so they knew that. And so he went and talked to him, and we waited a long time, about 45 minutes in the dark, just kind of waiting. And lo and behold, James shows up with this other Sea Org member, and he gets in the back of the car. He's really quiet, shy kid. And they're not telling me much about what's going on. But what I gathered was that James wanted to go back. And this is really sad because James had grown up in the Sea Org. He didn't know what he was going to do, where he was going to go. And I hope I have his name right. It may not be James, but I don't even have his last name. Anyway, I knew he was 18 somehow. And we took everyone back to the airport. They bought tickets and got back on the plane and went back to international base. I feel so bad because James wanted freedom. He wanted out. And I had to be part of this mission to get him back. And there was no force involved. James wanted to go back of his own free will. He didn't fight it because he really didn't know what he was going to do. He was terrified. And it was, for him, I realized it was more comfortable to get in the car and go back to international base than to face the random world that he knew nothing about.
Well, he also probably had no resources, maybe no identification, no idea how it works. Of course, that's not necessarily an option, hey. And that's what they do, from what I've heard at the international base, is starve you of options, you know. Yeah, and I totally can understand you kind of feeling I don't know. Would you call it remorse? Like, how do you feel about that time?
I just feel bad for him, and I feel bad, for participating, but mainly for the fact that he wanted freedom. There must have been something so horrible that he was trying to escape. No telling what that was.
You didn't ask him?
I didn't get to. I could never get one-on-one with him because he was in the back seat of my car under complete, escort of these two Sea Org members. And it was basically, I asked all I could, and I got that he was 18. I got that he had grown up, and, because he gave me the same thing, the acceptable truth, the things that he was allowed to talk about. He was allowed to say he grew up in Scientology, he grew up in the Sea Org pretty much, and that he was 18 years old. And I wasn't even allowed to know what his post was. It's like,
What does that do to you? Does like you as a Scientologist staff member, right, at this point? You said you were never in the Sea Org, correct? You were a staff member.
no, but my direct superiors were Sea Org members. So I worked very close to the Sea Org for many years when I was in OSA, Office of Special Affairs.
Yes, but this scenario, like I really struggle to imagine it, because if if I think, what would I do, and I can't imagine not being able to kind of ask questions, or feeling like there's certain information I'm not allowed to know. Like, does this go into your brain and make you go, hang on a minute, what the heck is going on here? Like, what's happening?
Exactly. Now, if there had been coercion involved, I probably would have had that crisis of conscience where it's like, guys, I'm not doing this. None of that happened. He came back on his own free will, but it was very sad. It's more sad than anything. It's like the guy had no option, and he felt it was better to go back and face the music than it was to make a break for freedom. And that's, that's how that kind of situation goes. And I didn't like being a part of it, and I feel regret about it, but, this was not an everyday thing. I wasn't always doing errands for OSA. I was, involved to some degree in the Lisa McPherson thing. So again, I had to do research on a family background, which is kind of like digging into their business. That didn't sit very well with me, but I did it at the time. I thought it was one of those things that I was able to accept because there were all kinds of other good things that I was doing, and I would love to apologize to the McPherson family for getting involved in their business, so I wish they could have had a better outcome for that. But one of the things I did do is I gave a very long and detailed interview. I think that's probably more comprehensive than anything that has been done on the Lisa McPherson tragedy. I have an interview, I think it's on Rumble. And so I did a lot of research and pretty much, I think, kind of solved technically what happened with Lisa and why she was literally forced into a corner where she was going to die in some way, shape, or form. No one is going to come clean with her and say, Lisa, we told you were clear. You were clear when you're not, and that's why your head is in a spin and you're unable to figure out what's real and what's not. And she literally died of a psychotic break that was induced by David Miscavige just ordering an auditor to tell her she was clear in a session. So, I mean, that was a huge tragedy. I didn't know that at the time because I was told what I was told, that the family was trying to get money from the church, and that it would have been a tragic accident and unfortunate, and you know, so I found the truth after, leaving the church about the Lisa McPherson story, and I had to piece it together because nobody was on the same page. Jesse Prince was not talking to Marty Rathbun, who was not talking to Pierre Etier. And so I took all these technical, and Marty was actually on Flag Base. He wasn't involved in the Lisa McPherson thing, but he was at Flag at the time, and he knew some of what was going on from the lady that was working for David Miscavige, managing that thing. So I finally put together the story, and I hope that helps, in some way. But yeah, I regret some of the, being involved with something I had no idea was into so much evil, and again, that doesn't paint the whole. I don't want to say all Scientologists. Most Scientologists are in there for, decent reasons. They want to improve themselves and humanity, and they think this is the way to do it. They have no idea of the long term that I think started all the way back in the 1950s with Hubbard himself, involvement in the deep state and the machinations that are behind religions that they meaning the ruling families, pretty much think that will help control the peoples of Earth by giving them these religions that they can get involved in. Anyway, a little off the topic. I'm sorry.
No, it's really really interesting to hear how you kind of went down that whole I guess a recollection of the things you were asked to do. And there's a really interesting cult expert called Janja Lalich. You might have heard of her before. She was involved in a political cult called the DWP, the Democratic Workers' Party. And she spoke in an interview and said, part of healing from, what it's like being in a cult and what it does to you and your identity and everything is also looking at the kind of things you would never do now, knowing, what they caused or what happened because of it. And I feel like that's a little bit what you described, and actually something I don't really hear many people sort of go into is the job roles and stuff that they had to carry out, because of, I guess it comes with things like shame or regret and things like that. So I really appreciate you actually talking about that a little bit. Did you see any other things like that made you go, I need to get out of here? Like what broke the camel's back, as to say? What was the straw?
The straw that broke the camel's back actually came coincidentally with the end of my last staff contract in Costa Rica in December 2009. I had a friend who said, Scott, check these videos out. And this was the Truth Rundown in the Tampa Bay Times. I think I got that right. And I clicked on the link cautiously. I thought, I'll check this out. It's probably some disgruntled ex-Scientologist. But I heard the name Mike Rinder, and I thought, Mike Rinder left Scientology? How did that happen? So I wanted to at least see what he had to say. I thought Mike will straighten this out, right? Because I had a lot of respect and admiration for Mike. I thought,
was he your boss? Like when you were in?
Yeah, I'm sorry, I forgot to finish earlier. My boss was the commanding officer, Western United States. His boss was Mike Rinder. So it's sort of like the grandfather in the tree. So I never met Mike Rinder while I was in the church. I shook hands with him after, at an independent gathering in Minnesota in 2012, which is the last one they did. Big July 4th picnic. So I met him there. That's the only time I got to see him in person. Didn't get to talk to him much or ask him any questions. I regret that. I wish I could have sat down with him. But yeah, Mike was my boss's boss, and he was in charge of OSA, Office of Special Affairs. So when my friend told me to look into these video testimonies, Tampa Bay Times, I noticed that I recognized Marty Rathbun. And he was the one who was this model Sea Org member of keeping ethics. So, and they all always dressed him up in the white Sea Org uniform and had all the stars around his head. And so he was sort of the god of, the Sea Org. So I said, I know that guy. I'd seen him on all the promotions. So he was a big man, and I didn't know his position exactly, but he explained it. And I became sort of a follower, or at least I followed his website, Marty Rathbun, and that's how I educated myself on what had happened in the church. So I saw videos from Marty, from Mike Rinder, and several other whistleblower Sea Org members that had been at international base and had been either beaten up by David Miscavige. And I'm going, wait a minute, this guy is beating people up. And then it started to finally fall together, because these small pockets of abuse that I've already told you a couple, those little things started to make sense. I thought, oh, this guy is in charge. He's crazy. He's evil. And he's beating people up because no one's there no one can stop him. Just because he can. He's being a total bully. And I thought, that's it. I like Scientology, but see, the whole movement at that time was Scientology's great. If we can get David Miscavige out of there, we're back in business, right? And the idea was that maybe Marty would be that man to save the day, or Mike Rinder, who knows? Somebody who had some respect of, leadership could go back in, and we could get David Miscavige out. Maybe the authorities will go in there and arrest him for all the kidnapping.
What do you make of Marty going back? What do you make of Marty going back into the shadows, kind of not out here anymore?
That's an interesting question, because I owe so much to Marty for all the things that he, put out that helped me to get to my sanity and understand what happened. So I'm skeptical about the story we're supposed to believe about Marty, that he went back to the church. I did find out that, yes, he went and made videos at Gold. And yes, he gave David Miscavige permission to use those videos. At the time, I didn't know. But I think, this is my own theory and my own opinion, and you can disagree with me if you want, anybody. I think that Marty knew David Miscavige very well. He knew how he could just end everything about Scientology for him and his wife, so they could raise a kid outside and away from Scientology and Scientology harassment for the rest of his life. And I think that's what he did. He called up David Miscavige, said, look, I'll do some videos for you, and I'll let Gold use these videos. You can use these videos, and I'm going to expose all the things, some of which, and I understand the angst that people feel that were his friends that he kind of told on, but I also feel that Marty was telling the truth for the most part. I don't know how much of the truth, but that he was trying to set the record straight. And so when he was talking about how they kind of butchered the narrative on the Scientology movie and the Leah Remini show, I think he was speaking from his heart, honestly. And I think he saw the opportunity to set the record straight, which is the main thing he wanted to do. Get out of it. A lot of people theorize that he was paid, and I don't think that even happened. I think he had made a lot of money auditing after the church and in other things, and he also had a lot of, and no one ever talked about this. No one ever gave Marty's side. It was always, Tony Ortega and Karen De La Carriere telling the story about how Marty betrayed the anti-Scientology movement. And basically, I don't think he took money. I think he used his equity in his other houses, and he wound up with a nice house, put a lot of money into it. The theory is that money came from the church, and the theory is also is alleged that he went back to the church. And no, he's still living, as far as I know, down in South Texas with his wife, raising a kid who must be about 12 years old by now. And anyway, that's my own theory. I don't trust the narrative on either side. I think it's a controlled opposition. I think there's a lot of intelligence agency infiltration of the anti-Scientology movement, and that's beyond the view of this particular show. We could do another show if you wanted about that, but again, it wouldn't be very popular. So
Yeah, so it delves a little bit into the sort of conspiracy aspect for me. Maybe if people want to see it, we could delve into it in another episode. And I think, fair enough. I do think your opinion on Marty will be taken as quite controversial, to be honest. It's hard to imagine how or why he would make those videos without being paid off. It's the easiest logical conclusion, I think, for most people. Do these videos, go and live your life, and we'll pay for you to live comfortably. Don't ever talk about it again, because he's disappeared. Where is he now? Does he write anymore? What does he do now? Is he your friend? Do you speak to him? Like, where's he at?
unfortunately, he's not speaking to me, and this could be just an email thing, because maybe he's got a different email account now. But I've been unable to get answers from him lately. I put out a website, and this is another rabbit hole of a whistleblower who claimed to have been kidnapped for many years in her teenage years. And then I found out that when she died in the hospital in Canada in 2023, last year, that's when I found out that not everything she was telling about her identity and her family was true. Now, as to her story, it now sounds far-fetched, but I'd kept the website up and with a disclaimer on it now, and she had named Marty as one of the ones who would have known about this. And so I made an apology to anyone who had, in my disclaimer, who I had named and put up. And I think when I put his name on that website, he probably thought, not speaking to him again. And I understand that. So I'm not an apologist or a defender of Marty per se, but I have my own opinion. I think highly of him. I appreciate what he did. I think he set the record straight on Lisa McPherson. He didn't tell us the whole story about those last 3 days, but I think he probably told the FBI authorities, because when he went out to Florida, when he wanted to get that, I think he's the kind of guy who wants to set things right. I think he saw the opportunity. Hey, I could just go out to Gold and get professional videos that would be really, everybody would watch. And then my tale, my end of the story would be told, and I can just get out of it. I don't owe anybody anything anymore. And so that's just, my opinion. Yeah, I do agree. It will be controversial. And I've been involved in another controversial thing with, this guy, Arnie Lerma. Arnie Lerma had lermanet.com and was one of the top targets for Scientology to handle, for OSA.
Why is that?
They hated him. He was the first to come out with a huge anti-Scientology website. In 2018, I believe, he and his wife, Ginger, had a huge falling out. A lot of, for the whole week up until this day, there was reports of violence at home, Arnie having to leave the house. And then Arnie tragically appears like he took his own life and either shot at Ginger or Ginger shot at herself. So that was a huge tragedy. And I wound up befriending Ginger because I wasn't, I wanted to investigate and find out what the truth was. And even though I was associated with Arnie's friends, and there was a big war going on between Ginger and Arnie's friends because they were accusing her of killing Arnie, and it was crazy. So I wound up putting Arnie's websites back online because I got Ginger to give me the account password and everything and to turn over the website to me. So I still have Arnie's site online in the face of the church. It's one of their worst, it used to be their worst nightmare. Nowadays there's so much on the internet, it's all lost in Google searches. But Arnie's website is a classic and I've kept it up there. And my theory is that he killed himself in order to not to go to jail because his wife had shot herself under the influence of oxycodone and blew out her teeth in her mouth. A bullet does not blow out a cheek unless it is coming from inside the mouth. So that's how I solved that crime. The police didn't even look at that. And that seems obvious when you look at it, but nobody got that. And the bullet holes were high up on the wall and not down on the floor like she told Tony Ortega. So her story didn't match. And so I got into a big controversy because a lot of those people were connected to Tony Ortega and Karen. And then it turns out Ginger wanted to go back to the church so that she could talk to her daughter. So it got really complicated. They felt Ginger was betraying them. So everybody left support of Ginger, and Ginger died, alone a few years ago. So that was tragic too. She was a Scientology brat that came up, had Scientology parents and had just led a tragic life because she got really involved in drugs.
Yeah, there's so much history, isn't there, within even just the people who have left Scientology, and there's all these different arguments and all kinds of stuff that goes on, and I sometimes get a bit nervous when it's something I've never heard of because I'm like, oh gosh, what am I walking into? Like, who's going to be at me? After hearing that we spoke about this thing, but I take no responsibility for the opinions of my guests.
Feel free to be the editor and cut these things out so that people have not everything of what I say is like going to be well received. Let's put it that way. I try to be true to myself and my own integrity. Being that I've been cut off in my communication lines, kind of in the same way as Scientology did to me with disconnection. I'm disconnected from the Ortega, Karen de la Carriere crowd, which I feel is connected to government agents and things like that. And that's a conspiracy theory. I get it. But, I try to stand on the truth that I know, because a lot of people have come to me with their own stories in confidence because they trust me, because they know that I am a person of integrity. So I don't have any alliances. I have people that are secretly friendly with me, but don't want to be physician with me. And I understand that. And I know that comes with the territory. And one of the things I've had to take responsibility for is that the truth is more important than the movement, the cult, a lot of people, a lot of Scientologists are going to be upset with me for running, or for my opinions on Ron Hubbard, based on what I've researched about him, which they refuse to look at. And that's their problem, not mine. I get that. And I understand it. And I sympathize with that. And I know they don't want those things to be true. They really don't, because it tends to undermine the auditing. But I found that when I put the truth even before the auditing, which I consider the most valuable thing to save from all this, that the truth is more important. And then once you've got the truth out of the way, you can now look at what is good, what is left in the auditing and such, and sort of take it apart in a new attitude of honesty, and be able to see, oh, this maybe is not the best thing. And these things are proven, rock solid, that we've used them for a long time, these tools, and they work really well. So we'll use these. And then everyone tends to be, in the end, happier because we've been able to take apart the good from the bad. And a lot of people even anti-Scientologists for a long time have recognized that there's some good in it and have wanted that to come true, that somebody could take apart the good from the bad. And it's a huge project. It may not even be done in my lifetime, and I'm not the only one working on it. And I rest on the work of a lot of people, including Marty when he wrote the book, What's Wrong with Scientology. He had a lot of great ideas on how to fix some of the auditing that I incorporated. So all of this is basically a big mess.
The kids call it a dumpster fire.
A dumpster fire. That's a great word for it. Anyway, would you like me to tell that story, or did you have another question?
I do have another question. I was wondering, in terms of the organization as we know it, what do you think should happen to it in the future?
The only salvation for the organization is if they can really, really have a Truth and Reconciliation Commission and try to make right. Sadly, a lot of the participation in quantity of people was in the 80s and 90s, and those people are passing on. So sadly, a lot of people will never see justice. Their money was taken from them, or various things. They were kicked out for no good reason, or they were denied auditing for some stupid reason. There's a lot of injustice. Okay, a Truth and Reconciliation Commission would be a requirement, and that needs to include the truth about L. Ron Hubbard's life. And unfortunately, the CIA file is still sealed, and that's almost unheard of for somebody who passes on. Their CIA files will open up. Hubbard's been gone for over 40 years. Yeah, 40 years now. Hubbard's been gone, and his CIA file is still sealed.
How'd you know that?
Because people have been trying to do Freedom of Information Act requests, and they're still denied. It's still, yeah. So that's unheard of for almost even ex-agents. They'll at least have some redacted thing. Hubbard, zero is coming out of it. So therefore, the chances that he worked with and for the deep state are very high, very high. And so those things need to come out. But even if that part didn't, the church needs to recognize that Hubbard was involved in a lot of crime through the Guardian's office. He did run the Guardian's office through Mary Sue Hubbard, his wife. He knew all about those things because they talked about them all the time. Maybe in the end, there were some things that Mary Sue did Hubbard didn't know about, but it's doubtful. In any case, all those things need to come to light. And then Scientology has a chance of reemerging as a benign, benevolent church, real church, where people, maybe they can still believe Hubbard is a saint or a god or something. I don't know. But maybe it's just like a psychoanalytic club or church where people use the good parts about it to help each other become better people. And that would be great, because that part's always been in Scientology, but when you mix those two, they never really mix well. But when those two are going at the same time, it's maddening, because people see this on TV, and a lot of Scientologists are convinced that all these things that they say happened in Scientology on TV, you can't trust a word of it. And because it doesn't make sense that somebody who was so good at coming up with solutions to the mind and to improving your life would also be involved in such lurid activities. So that has to all come to light, to answer your question.
Yeah, and we know that lots of different actual real world crimes have occurred because of things that happened in Scientology. Who's responsible? Who do you think is responsible for it?
Ultimately, we need to pin it on L. Ron Hubbard for structuring the organization so it was covertly authoritarian. When he came out with this organization board, he said, this is a communication chart. And as a communication chart, it's wonderful. If you have any voluntary organization, use that chart. It's great. Everybody knows what everybody else's job is. You don't need a leader very much. You don't need a boss looking over your shoulder. Everybody does their thing. And then comes maybe to meet and sort out any little things that need to be sorted out. And Hubbard invented that. That was genius. But covertly, he put these little pyramid structures above it, and this person has the word of law. You could do a complete investigation and find someone guilty of crimes in Scientology, and you can have a Scientology executive pardon that guy the next day. And Hubbard did that all the time on the ship. So people need to recognize that Hubbard set this up the way that David Miscavige could now manipulate it to his advantage. And he has. He basically took it over. He runs it as a dictatorship, total authoritarian dictatorship. His word is law. He's able to alter, at first he didn't dare alter L. Ron Hubbard because he knew there'd be a mutiny, but he's been able to do that little by little. And I don't know what his real purpose and reason for doing that is, or whether he takes orders from somebody else, but he's definitely screwed up. So David Miscavige is the bad guy. L. Ron Hubbard is the origin. He should accept the responsibility for laying it out like this so it could be this way. A lot of people argue, well, yes, he came up with all kinds of checks and balances in the end, in the early 80s. And yes, that's true, and those were good solutions too. However, he never eradicated these policies that gave ultimate authority to the authorities, that you could not question these authorities, you could not write reports on them in any meaningful way and get justice. And that was all abused. So Hubbard set it up that way. And Hubbard, I would let Hubbard off the hook and say, well, that was just an honest mistake, except that he actually took advantage of that and ruined some people's lives inside and outside of the church. And those stories are all over the internet. There's multiple stories. He put kids in chain lockers. He threw people overboard of the ship that couldn't swim. Some of his most avid supporters, the lady who invented the personality test, the one that gets shoved in your face at the mall, the lady who invented that, it's actually a pretty good test. Her name was Julia Salmon. She was with Hubbard from 1951 or maybe even 1950, the very beginning. And she helped him develop the personality test. She was herself a psychologist. And she came and did the original Class 8 course, as far as I understand, and on the ship. And when you made a mistake on the Class 8 course, you were thrown overboard. Well, she had been a loyal supporter of Hubbard for decades, and 2 decades. And so here she is. She's unable to swim. She's overweight. Alan Walter, the guy I talked about earlier, who ended up in Dallas, he ended up having to dive into the muddy, dangerous, place where the ships were parked to rescue this lady who would have drowned otherwise. I don't know what Hubbard would have done if that had hit the papers. It's like, but Hubbard knew about it. He actually watched it happen and said nothing. So, people cannot defend. Hubbard is indefensible in the end.
Yes, he also has the benefit of being dead, and many of the things that have happened, Lisa McPherson, people's passports being locked up, child labor, all of these things, he can't be held accountable for. And I try to imagine, like, say it's like a pie chart, right? What percentage is accountable where, is it the executives? Is it people that ran the organizations? Like, who is responsible? Because, as well as I do, you can't take a group down. It doesn't work like that. It's people that commit atrocities, not ideas or groups. So who's responsible? I want you to lay it down for me now. I'll make a pie chart. We'll put it on screen.
That's a great point, and I appreciate you bringing that up, because Hubbard could actually be forgiven for the most part if he had left it in a non-authoritarian way, that people could really reform the church, and then a natural process would have happened, because Scientologists, even up at the top levels, are really enthusiastically good people. And I think what they would have done was stuck to the datum that the truth is senior to the policy, to the other things, and would have unraveled some of this stuff, made some apologies and amends, and fixed things. That opportunity came and went in the 1980s. And then Hubbard, would have been known for some of his crimes, but he would have thought well of because he left a very good package that could fix itself. In fact, he used to brag that Scientology can fix itself. And for the most part, he's right. I've worked in these small organizations, and without the interference of the Sea Org members coming in, we had everything all good. We had all our debts paid in Dallas. We had paid everything off. We were about to deliver co-audit courses where people could actually, for a low cost, come in and just train and audit each other. Sea Organization came in and said, nope, we're going to do ideal organizations. You guys got to raise $1 million to buy a new building. That was 2004. Okay, so to address your question, David Miscavige, because of what I just said, David Miscavige bears the large portion of the pie chart, everything from here to here.
How much? 60%? 50%? How much?
I would say 2/3. 2/3. Okay. Minimum. And that's a bare minimum. I would up to 90% David Miscavige, because David Miscavige is, let's face it, he's evil. He's the one who did Lisa McPherson. And he, ironically, he blames L. Ron Hubbard for the step 0 of the introspection rundown, isolate the person. They could have done that in a way that was not intrusive to Lisa, that would have been, it is a good idea to isolate somebody in a psychotic break, but not in a forcible way. You don't hold her down with security guards. That came from David Miscavige. Those orders came from David Miscavige, and that's what ultimately killed her. So a lot of the baggage that Scientology has right now, that it's going to be almost, like you said, a dumpster fire, it's going to be almost impossible to put out. That's David Miscavige. And so the other 10 to 20% is his lieutenants. People like
Debbie Cook. Is she on the list?
Debbie Cook, I think, did her duty of blowing the whistle, in the end. The Debbie Cook letter got so many people out of the church. So she was sort of like pro L. Ron Hubbard, anti David Miscavige. She was the one saying that Scientology can be fixed if we get David Miscavige out of there.
Does that counter the sort of employment of children, though? Like, do you know what I mean?
Yeah. It doesn't fix those things. But I think if a group starts to straighten out, they start seeing these things as like, oh, this isn't the best idea. Now, even with children in the Sea Org, what they did was a big problem, because they made the pendulum swing the other way. They said, oh, it's true that we can't take care of kids, that they're always in these horrific conditions. So therefore, we're going to just make a rule, no children in the Sea Org, which wound up in being what I put on my website is factually, by the rules of the United Nations, by their language, a genocide, meaning that a group of people who wants to join a group to save the world is not allowed to procreate. That is de facto genocide. And that is David Miscavige. And so people hate when I say that. They say, oh, you're trivializing the Holocaust. I didn't say it was the Holocaust, or try to compare those things. I said, when you look at the United Nations defensive groups, where you're not to interfere with their reproduction, you're not to interfere with their rights, David Miscavige has done exactly that. And I have an article on my site on that, and have had for many years. It's very unpopular because people don't want to use that word or say that that's what's happening. But when you have a rule that you can't have children, it led to multiple abortions. I mean, thousands probably. And that's not what Scientology is supposed to be about. They always used to say, we're not pro-abortion, read Dianetics, Dianetics wasn't pro-abortion, supposedly. But then you find out that Hubbard had aborted in the past, or at least his son said that he might have been involved in that, and that his son was an attempted abortion, and that's why he came out premature. But then Hubbard nursed him back to health and back to life. So Hubbard was a very troubled individual at that time, at least, right? Anyway, back to your point, though, David Miscavige, I would say, is, somewhere between 60 and 90% of that pie chart. And then you have his lieutenants. And Debbie Cook, I think, was trying to be a good guy. To run flag, yeah, it's you got to be a real, really aggressive person. And some people get hurt. But I think she tried her best and was trying to do it the good way. I think she had good intentions, in other words.
Yeah, I've spoken to people who still have nightmares about her and recall her from their childhood as being a very terrifying person. So I kind of struggle to go, oh, that's someone trying to be the good guy, because it doesn't really add up.
Yeah, by her letter. Now I haven't heard those accounts, and I'm totally open to the fact that I did run into we call it a valence. A valence means like a personality. And there was an evil valence, especially in OSA International, and amongst Scientology women who had a lot of authority and power. Of course, say the same thing about men, but in particular, that bitch valence, you might say. I'm sure Debbie Cook was that. And I'm sure that she was pretty rough on some people. So yeah, I'm not going to argue on that point with you, or say that she was a good guy. But I think she distanced herself from David Miscavige's abuse, and because she had got a taste of that herself at international base, and I'm sure that changed her view on how to treat people, because she got the treatment that she dished out at international base, and then she got out of the thing. She took the money and said, I'm signing a paper. I will never say anything bad about Scientology again. It's the same with Angie Blankenship. That was the name I was searching for earlier. She was the one who managed for David Miscavige the treatment of Lisa McPherson. So she passed on all those orders. She's still at large in Clearwater. And I even hear that she had some words with her and Smith Levine. So, but she's supposed to be, she took the money, got pregnant, and left. She's supposed to be quiet. And I think she has been ever since. So that's somebody they don't want talking.
Yeah, I think I find a particular cowardice in knowing what's gone on and allowing it to continue by agreeing to silence. I struggle to deal with that. What percentage do you give them then? The could be whistleblowers that take the money and run and go silent. Where do you put them on the pie chart?
Let's say 15%. 15% for them, 15% for the bad executives, and then the other 70% David Miscavige. Or no, we need L. Ron Hubbard in there because he started the thing. Another, 60 for David, 15, and then another 10% for L. Ron Hubbard because, like I said, he left enough good in the data that he left in the policies that it would have straightened out. And a lot of these things he did in violation of his own policy. So if he had followed his own policy, even he wouldn't be in as much trouble as he is now. So, I have no idea the depth of crime that went on. I've heard a lot of things. I've been unable to completely verify them. But it's in the realm of mafioso, mafia type stuff. That the Guardian's office was, and as intelligence agencies are, pretty much they're the mafia, glorified mafia. That they're glorified with the letters, the 3-letter agencies of the government. They're supposed to be the government. They're supposed to be in charge. They're supposed to be blessed by the government. That's the word I was looking for.
Well, if our audience are interested in hearing more about that, I'm sure they will let us know down in the comments below this video. Scott, thank you so much for talking to me today. It's been so interesting to hear you talk. Have you got anything you want to leave our audience on? Any thoughts or something you would like to leave them with?
Well, yeah. In order for people to understand the work that I'm doing, I like people to think, especially people who have either abandoned or made, impossible the idea that auditing could be any good or any of a good thing. I'm really interested on this planet, and I realize I'm talking in big Scientology terms here, but still, I mean, just as a not, let's say for a minute, I'm a non-Scientologist. I'm still very interested in people having some way to get at their traumas and their what we call aberrations, or the things that are not straightened out in them, in order to have a better world. Okay. And I've looked into psychology and I found some interesting, good ideas and answers. Nothing major spectacular. Psychiatry, the same thing.
Do you think they're evil?
I don't know. I don't think they're all evil. I think they're probably used to be 2/3, and I think the profession's slowly cleaning itself up. I still think you have people who want to shock people and prescribe them, joke them up with drugs, and they're fine with that. And they're just in it for the money, and they don't care about people. But then there's the people that become psychologists and psychiatrists because they care about people. And again, same reason I joined Scientology. I thought this is the way that I can help people. They enroll in school because they think this is the way I will help people with their mind. Okay. So we have a lot of people in distress about their minds, about their conditions, their situations, and a lot of crime out there in the world, and a lot of war. And these are the things Scientology wanted to eradicate. I'm always interested in inner work, and I'm willing to promote inner work that works. I'm willing to look at, things, and I've done that for many years. So if people are wondering what I'm doing with my project, I'm just trying to do just that. I'm trying to take the good things about Dianetics and Scientology, which in another show we could talk about the origins, because Hubbard borrowed or, inherited a lot of these things from earlier works. Okay.
Someone might say stole.
Stole in many cases. And he did give credit in the beginning, and then it was less and less credit. Those things are in the old books only. You don't have them in the new books. So anyway, yeah, to put together, because Dianetics is as simple as just closing your eyes and reliving an experience. And that's too much for some people if the trauma was too heavy. So that's why you have all these other things like Scientology auditing and other lighter auditing approaches. And so I'm still big on auditing. I'm still big on helping people and helping people figure out their minds and get to personal freedom. And maybe that helps society to a degree because people are happier and freer. And so that's what I'm about. I'm not saying I have all the answers, but I feel like I've made a good progress at picking apart what's good out of Scientology. I have many websites, but I'm only going to give one because you'll find all the links at that one website, freescientology.us. So freescientology.us is my hub website where you can click on many different ideas or auditing routines or even other subjects that I've put together websites for. And that's my work. And I'm open to talking about my experiences more and answering questions and being honest about what I went through and what things are, what I think things are about. There are many opinions, obviously. And, but I got a good look at Scientology from where I was. I got to experience the good of it down on the ground floor in the organizations where all you had to do is kind of open the book and follow the directions. And then I got the Sea Org version, and I got to go to Sea Org bases and see the edges of things, people working in the rehabilitation project force. So I'm not I'm not big on being an apologist for Scientology.
Have you ever spoke to the FBI about like what you've seen?
I never had things that I felt were on that level. Um, I there were only a couple times that I was asked to do things that were against the law, and I was not ordered to do them. I was just suggested you could do this. One was to somehow get a package that was going to someone who was no longer in good standing, and the bookstore had shipped him a meter or something. So they essentially wanted me to misrepresent who I was and try to trick UPS or whatever out of the meter and get it sent back to the church, and so cheat this guy out of his meter. And I like I said, I was not big on lying or pretending I was someone I was not, and so that didn't work out. So it's just like in any mafia or organization or government, you need the good guys to be the face of what you're doing to distract people from what the bad guys are doing. And that is, it's also like a body. The body has to be mostly healthy or the parasite can't do its thing. Okay. And unfortunately, Scientology needs to purge those parasites out. And the only way they're going to do it is to apply what's written there and enact real justice and do a truth and reconciliation on the people who have been harmed or, betrayed by something that was supposed to help. And I'm not at all interested in keeping that thing going until it completely reforms.
All right. Well, I mean, there's been some wild, interesting subjects come up today, Scott. Very interesting to talk to you, and I'm looking forward to seeing how this is received as well. Hearing from you, do you have socials or anything like that, or just is it your websites? Is that where you would like me to direct people if they want to find out more about you yourself?
Yeah, I'll repeat. The website is freescientology.us. I'm very easy to find on Facebook, and all of my contact data is public on my Facebook. So you should be able to get in touch with me, through my email is best.
Amazing. All right. Well, I will leave that linked below. Scott, thank you so much for this conversation today. If you guys want to see any more of these interviews I do, there'll be another link on the screen somewhere. Go click on it now and you can watch the next one. Until next time, see ya.